I pulled into the familiar driveway of my parents' house, the one I hadn't seen in 2 years. Greenville hadn't changed much. The same brick-lined streets, the same row of magnolias, leaves drifting lazily in the autumn wind. But the memories pressed down on me, heavier than the luggage in my trunk. Peace costs less than proximity, I reminded myself quietly as I stepped out, adjusting Elijah's backpack on my shoulder. He gave me a small, reassuring smile. 17 now, tall for his age, his eyes carried an awareness beyond his years. He had already sensed what was coming. The door opened, and my mother's half-smile didn't reach her eyes. She greeted me with polite indifference, while my father tried a joke that landed awkwardly, like a stone skipping over tension. Inside, the smell of roasting turkey and pumpkin pie mingled with something intangible. Judgment wrapped in family nostalgia. I tried to ignore it, to ground myself, but it was everywhere. And then I saw her, June. She was glowing in a way only pregnancy could allow, her smirk precise, her hand resting possessively on David's arm. My sister had always been the one to make a room feel small. Dinner started under the polite chaos of our extended family. Plates clattered, voices rose, and I found myself carefully threading small talk, each word measured, each laugh delayed. June leaned back, letting the weight of her confidence settle on me, comparing herself without saying it outright. I watched Elijah quietly, knowing he sensed the silent barbs before they even landed. My stomach tightened as a toast rang out. "To strong family values," someone said cheerfully. The words were a knife, slicing right through the illusion of warmth I had carried all the way from Charleston. Then it happened. June turned to me mid-laughter, her voice crisp, deliberate. "Well, at least my baby has a dad." Silence dropped like a heavy curtain. My mother chuckled lightly, as if to diffuse the tension, but it did nothing to shield the sting. Elijah froze, caught between instinct and surprise, his jaw tightening, eyes flicking between us as though measuring the injustice. I swallowed hard, holding myself together. Not every battle deserved engagement at the dinner table. The words hung there, lingering, echoing in my chest, and I chose to remain silent. Later, in the quiet of my childhood bedroom that still smelled faintly of cedar and old books, Elijah came to me. His hands tugged nervously at the cuffs of his sweatshirt as he asked, "Why do you let them treat you like that?" The frustration in his voice mirrored my own hidden fury, the one I'd carried for years in polite silence. I explained, carefully, how I'd tried, how every argument had ended with me dismissed or misrepresented. How sometimes, giving up on confrontation had been the only way to survive. He listened, silent, but I felt the storm behind his calm eyes. He checked his phone with a precision that betrayed something more than casual distraction. Then, without a word, he pulled me into a hug. Warm and firm, yet quiet, everything unspoken between us held in that embrace. I patted his back lightly, thinking it was just comfort, a moment of mother and son solidarity. But somewhere in the soft squeeze of his arms, a seed had been planted. A thought of justice, of righting wrongs not yet visible. I didn't know it yet, but the gears had started turning. Outside, the sun dipped behind the familiar rooftops, casting long shadows across the lawn. The laughter from the kitchen seeped through the walls, carrying the same bite as June's words, now coated with the dimming daylight. I sat on the edge of my bed, Elijah's shoulder still pressing against mine, and I felt the quiet of the house press back at me. The tension didn't dissolve with the darkness, it only thickened. I closed my eyes and reminded myself to breathe, to hold the line, to prepare for what was coming. This wasn't just Thanksgiving. It was a reckoning I hadn't anticipated. And though I remained composed outwardly, my mind spun through the patterns of old arguments, the silent rules of family dynamics, and the careful navigation of pride and patience. I recognized the old familiar feeling, the hollow ache of being misunderstood, undervalued, even abandoned. But mixed into that ache was something else this time, a spark of awareness, an understanding that staying silent didn't mean powerless. Elijah's quiet strength, his small, determined gestures, reminded me that the battle lines were already drawn. We weren't just surviving another dinner. We were preparing for the subtle wars that shaped every whispered insult, every calculated smirk, every casual dismissal. As night settled and the house finally slowed, I heard the faint creak of the stairs, the distant hum of voices settling, and I knew the next day would demand more than composure. We had weathered the opening salvo, now we braced for the layers underneath, the ones carefully hidden beneath the smiles and the toasts. For the first time in years, I felt that the silent endurance might not be enough. The family gathering that had broken me was just the beginning, and I would have to find a way through the storm, not by retaliation yet, but by noticing, learning, preparing. I woke early the morning after Thanksgiving, hoping to slip past the awkward chatter that always followed the first meal of the day. But Elijah's bed was empty. The covers were neatly tucked, the pillow undisturbed, and his phone still sat on the charger. His wallet was gone too, but there wasn't a note left behind. My stomach tightened, and for a moment I thought maybe he had slipped into the kitchen ahead of me, grabbing a second breakfast or sneaking a cup of coffee. But the house was quiet. Too quiet. I called out his name softly, then louder, letting the sound ripple through the hallways of the old house. No response. My parents were downstairs, sipping coffee and discussing the football game, entirely oblivious to my rising panic. June, with that irritating smirk still fresh on her face from last night, leaned against the doorframe. "Maybe he just needed a break from you too," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. I forced a laugh, nodding as if she were joking, but inside a tight coil of worry began to twist. I tried to reason with myself. He's 17, not 7. He's smart, he wouldn't just vanish. But nothing about this morning felt normal. I pulled on my robe and wandered through the kitchen, peering out the window, watching the familiar street awaken with the slow ease of a South Carolina morning. Something was off, though I couldn't place it yet. My mind kept circling the last conversation we'd had at dinner, the way he had looked at me with those quiet, weighing eyes, as if already testing the waters of his own patience. Calls to his friends went unanswered. Nothing. My parents suggested he was being dramatic or just testing boundaries, brushing off the unease gnawing at me. June seized the opportunity to taunt again. "You let him watch too many of those therapy TikToks," she said, her tone light but sharp. David added casually, "He's probably fine." Kids test boundaries when they don't have a father figure. I felt the jab sink deep, another twist of the knife, another reminder that in this house, empathy was optional and cruelty often unintentional. I retreated to the porch, the autumn air brushing against my face, carrying the faint smell of fallen leaves and the distant warmth of my father's burnt coffee. I let my thoughts roam, tracing Elijah's recent behaviors, the library trips, the hours spent quietly researching, the questions he had asked that I brushed off as curiosity. Something deliberate had been brewing in him, a plan he had kept hidden. My chest tightened with the realization that this wasn't a moment of rebellion. It was intentional, measured, and fueled by a need to uncover what the family refused to talk about. That's when I noticed it on the kitchen counter. A folded piece of paper, tucked beneath the fruit bowl. Not addressed to me, but unmistakably in Elijah's hand. I opened it carefully. The words were few, but precise. "Visiting Uncle Tom. I need to know why we never talk about him." My heart lurched. Uncle Tom, the name I hadn't heard in decades. Mom's estranged brother, a man removed from our lives after some family feud 20 years ago. We had never spoken of him, and yet Elijah had pieced together enough fragments to seek him out on his own. I remembered his question years ago about the man in the lake picture, a photo hidden long before I could answer. I checked his backpack. It was gone too. He left intentionally. And then it clicked. The hours at the library, the subtle inquiries, the quiet reflection in his room last week. This was not a spur-of-the-moment act. He had a purpose, a path chosen deliberately to unearth truths we had buried. The guilt gnawed at me. Had my silence, my careful avoidance of conflict, taught him that the only way to find clarity was to disappear? That the walls of this family held answers only behind closed doors? I folded the note back carefully, placing it where he had left it. For now, the family couldn't know. Not yet. I slid my finger across the screen of my phone and typed a single message. Simple. Calm. "I'm not mad. Just come home safe." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The sun climbed higher, filtering through the blinds and casting stripes across the hardwood floor. The house hummed with the usual noise of a post-holiday morning, but beneath it, the tension lingered, a quiet storm that had shifted the air. I couldn't yet grasp the full scope of what Elijah was pursuing, but I felt the weight of it pressing into the spaces I had thought were safe. The disappearance was a message, a challenge, a reminder that the truths we hide have a way of finding those determined enough to uncover them. And I knew, deep down, that this morning marked a turning point, for him, for me, and for the fragile illusions that had kept our family bound by silence for so long. I found Tom's number tucked inside a faded envelope in the back of my mom's garage storage bin, the one I hadn't touched in years. Dialing it felt like opening a time capsule, a thread connecting me to a past I'd tried hard to forget. The phone rang once, twice, and then a gruff voice answered. I hesitated, words stuck in my throat, before quietly saying, "It's Brooklyn." There was a pause, then a curt acknowledgement. I ended the call, the hum of the line still echoing in my mind as I sat back and remembered the last time I'd set foot on his property as a child. Tom had always been larger than life, both in stature and personality. He wasn't afraid to speak up, especially against the way our family treated women. I remembered him laughing loudly, his voice booming through the kitchen, full of warmth but edged with an unflinching sense of justice. But there was that one incident, a violent fracture I barely understood then, a slammed door, shouting, my mother's rage spilling over, voices that carved fear into the corners of my memory. That was when Tom walked away, cutting ties, leaving us to navigate the fallout ourselves. I'd never revisited those memories until now. I knew I had to find Elijah. My concern outweighed the unease threading through me. Driving toward Tom's cabin-style home, every turn along the winding wooded roads felt like retracing steps of my own past, like the landscape itself was stitched with memories I'd tried to bury. The pine-scented air mixed with the crisp chill of early morning, each mile a reminder that the truths we avoid eventually find a way to surface. I gripped the steering wheel, thinking of Elijah, imagining him standing alone, confronting a world of secrets I hadn't been brave enough to challenge myself. Pulling into the gravel driveway, I saw him. Elijah sat on the porch, his posture upright, eyes fixed on Tom as if weighing every word. Relief and fear collided in my chest. Tom greeted me stiffly, his expression unreadable, yet he didn't ask me to leave. I stayed back, silent, letting the moment unfold. Elijah's voice was firm, almost accusatory. "Why does no one talk about you?" The question cut through the air like a blade. Tom didn't falter. He told him about the disowning, the long-standing grievances, the way our family had manipulated and gaslit him. The weight of his words made my stomach knot, guilt rising as I realized how much Elijah had already understood, how much he had to reconcile on his own. Inside Tom's modest home, the walls were lined with photographs, snapshots of a family I hadn't been allowed to see yet couldn't ignore, images of myself as a child, of Elijah, and even my father. I ran my fingers over one photo of Tom smiling beside me, and the years of silence hit me all at once. "Why never reach out?" I asked, my voice trembling, more to fill the space than for an answer. He simply said, "Because I knew they'd twist it into me trying to poison you." That truth settled heavily on me. By staying silent all these years, I had unknowingly become part of the very system Tom had rejected. I felt the sting of complicity, the shame of the generational patterns I had allowed to persist. Then he handed me a letter, yellowed and creased from time. "You deserved better. But they wouldn't let you see it," he said softly. I held it as if it were a talisman, a tangible acknowledgement that the courage to walk away had never been about surrender, but about protecting oneself and others from toxicity. Elijah watched quietly, his young face absorbing the lesson in restraint, in facing betrayal without yielding to it. He understood that sometimes the bravest act is not to fight back with noise, but to navigate the silence with purpose. We left Tom's house with a weight lifted, yet a storm gathering. I hugged him tightly, the connection between us stretching across decades of lost time. Elijah chose to ride with me back, his eyes resolute, silently declaring he wouldn't allow the family's injustices to continue unchecked. As we drove through the winding, shaded roads, clouds began to gather overhead, mirroring the brewing tension I knew awaited us back home. The journey wasn't just about uncovering hidden truths, it was about preparing for the reckoning that lay ahead and understanding that some battles require strength, strategy, and the courage to confront the past head-on. Returning home with Elijah felt different this time. The house seemed smaller, colder, its familiar corners shadowed by unease. I sensed eyes following us, whispers curling through the hallways like smoke, half-heard and sharp. Aunt Lorraine hovered near the kitchen doorway, her gaze flickering toward us before she looked away, and my cousins exchanged glances that spoke in silence. Elijah's jaw was tight, his brow furrowed in ways that made me press gently on his shoulder. "What did you hear earlier?" I asked softly, letting him choose how much to reveal. He shook his head, but I could tell the memory weighed on him. June hovered too, offering to fetch drinks, but lingered just long enough to watch our every move, her smile a little too sweet, her posture just enough to feel threatening. Eloise avoided my eyes entirely, offering a weak, fleeting smile that barely brushed the corners of her lips. I steadied myself, inhaling the tense air. I knew the calm before the storm, and the storm was always sharpest when it came unexpected. Elijah finally spoke, his voice low. Silas said something. I heard him on the porch. His eyes were serious, scanning me for a reaction. He said, "They never saw me, but I saw them." And then, "She'll never know how deep this cut goes." I felt the words poison my mind as they sank in. The casual cruelty carried intention. I debated confronting Silas immediately, the instinct to call him out roaring in me, but I knew that evidence would serve better than anger. I asked Elijah to stay silent, to trust my plan. He nodded, and I felt a grim satisfaction in the shared understanding. We would not allow them to strike unchecked. I vowed internally, nothing would be said until the moment was right. Patience, I reminded myself, was a weapon. The front porch gathering later that afternoon tested that patience. June, radiant with calculated charm, drew me into a conversation as if she were offering inclusion. The moment shifted when she gestured toward a cousin and said, "Well, at least some of us don't have to worry about marriage or husbands." The word spinster hung in the air, sharp and deliberate, and I felt its sting thread through my chest. Guests shuffled uncomfortably, but I forced a polite laugh, masking the searing mix of anger and shame that threatened to rise. Memories of my mother's subtle barbs, the same word used in years past to puncture confidence, flared up in my mind. This public jab, performed for neighbors and kin alike, cut deeper than private insults, and I clenched my fists beneath the table to steady myself. Excusing myself to the study, I closed the door quietly behind me. Pulling out Elijah's letter from Uncle Tom, I began connecting dots in my mind. Silas's words, June's remark, the whispers in the hall, they were pieces of a larger puzzle, one I intended to control. I sent Elijah away to visit a friend, creating a buffer while I prepared my own approach. I typed a message to Silas. "We need to talk, tonight." But I paused, not sending, letting the threat hang in my mind, a carefully loaded pause. I practiced what I would say, each word chosen for calm precision, each breath measured to mask the fury beneath. I would not stumble into their traps. I would let them come to me, and when they did, I would be ready, unflinching, factual, and in control. They thought I was quiet, harmless, a woman who would yield. They had no idea what I was planning. The house settled into an almost deceptive quiet that evening. I moved through the kitchen, preparing tea, listening to the soft murmur of conversation drifting from the living room. Everyone acted too normal, as if rehearsing civility for an audience that wasn't there. Elijah stayed upstairs. His presence downstairs only guaranteed a subtle volley of passive-aggressive remarks. I felt the tension coil in the air, waiting, patient, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. June hummed quietly while folding laundry, performing the domestic angel act flawlessly, her smile gentle but eyes sharp. I murmured under my breath, "It's always quietest before a twister hits," and I felt the truth of the words sink into my chest. By the fire, the family gathered, murmuring about mundane things, weather, politics, trivial news. Yet beneath it all, every move, every laugh, felt calculated. A board game was suggested, and we all settled in, smiles drawn taut, eyes flicking, calculating. Nothing was innocent. Every gesture contained an undercurrent of intent. Later, when the house had emptied of all but the lingering warmth of the fire, June found me alone in the kitchen, wiping counters. She leaned casually against the doorway, asking about Elijah's grades as if testing the waters. Then, with a faint tilt of her head, she added, "He's so intense, like his father, right?" My smile stayed tight, polite, but my pulse quickened. She was probing, looking for cracks. Leaning slightly closer, voice soft and measured, she said, "I just worry he's watching too much, you know. Maybe it's better not to question things." I held her gaze, measured, deliberate, and replied calmly, "Maybe it's better to stop underestimating what people see." The words landed like stones in still water. My message was clear. I knew, and I would no longer yield to intimidation. Back in my old bedroom, I opened a hidden folder, retrieving receipts, photographs, a printed screenshot of a message, all evidence carefully collected over time. My initial fear had faded, replaced by a methodical clarity. I faced myself in the mirror, whispering, "You've stayed quiet. They counted on that." Then I drafted a note for June, one sentence only. "You pushed too far. I push back in public next time." I tucked it inside an old family cookbook, a volume that once sparked childish disputes between the sisters. The nostalgia cloaked my warning like a hidden blade. Every detail was calculated, precise, controlled. Just before I turned in for the night, my phone buzzed with a missed call from an unknown number. The voicemail that followed made my stomach drop, a distorted female voice, abrupt, fragmented. "He's not who you think. He never was." The line went dead mid-sentence. I replayed it, studying the tone, the rhythm, the breathing, wondering who might be behind it. Could it be Rowena? Someone else? My instinct screamed louder than any rational thought. I texted Elijah, instructing him to lock his door, my hands trembling slightly despite my calm exterior. The evening's calm had been a facade. I sensed the eruption was coming, and it would be mine to shape. Somewhere between the firelight and the shadows, I knew the game had changed. The evening air inside the house was thick, almost tangible, as if the walls themselves were holding the tension. At dinner, I could feel it crawling around me, June's subtle barbs woven into conversation about my work, little digs at my parenting style. The guests laughed lightly, oblivious to the undercurrents, but each chuckle felt like salt in a wound. I weighed my options carefully, deciding between immediate reaction and calculated response. June moved a notepad I'd left on the counter, just a hair out of place, nudging my coffee mug slightly off-center, small gestures loaded with intent. I breathed deeply, recalling my prior warnings, and recognized this as the moment to act. Observation, calculation, and patience became my armor, even as anger simmered beneath. Later, I seized the first opportunity for a subtle countermove. A compliment meant for June about her new presentation at work, I redirected to myself, acknowledging it with measured pride. Not loudly, not confrontational, but enough for the family to notice. I let small hints of my knowledge drift into conversation, strategic glances, quiet remarks suggesting I knew more than I let on. A minor slip revealed I was aware of one of June's secretive maneuvers without revealing the full picture. The family shifted in their seats, sensing the change. I could feel the tension tighten, their curiosity mingled uneasily with a creeping awareness that I was no longer the silent participant. Every word, every motion was a deliberate balance between diplomacy and veiled confrontation, each heartbeat a drum marking the coming storm. Then came the calculated clash. I framed a casual question about a previous family agreement, one June had skirted, voicing it as a gentle inquiry. Her confident mask faltered briefly, a flicker of unease passed across her face. I felt a pulse of satisfaction, controlled, deliberate, knowing she recognized the boundaries I was now asserting. The room remained outwardly calm, but I sensed the subtle tremors in the air. Everyone watched, half aware of the shift, yet unable to pinpoint its origin. I stayed composed, my posture calm and assertive, signaling a new order in this subtle battlefield. No longer passive, no longer easily swayed. The emotional weight of years of restraint fused with clarity, turning suppressed fury into a poised, deliberate strategy. After the dinner ended, I retreated to my study, shutting the door behind me. Alone, I reviewed notes and evidence I had quietly amassed over time, details, incidents, observations, all forming a lattice of information ready to be deployed. I considered Elijah's perspective, the example I wanted to set for him about courage, intelligence, and standing firm. I documented impressions, potential interventions, and sequences for public revelation, constructing a mental blueprint of the confrontation yet to come. By the time I closed my journal, the plan was set, deliberate, precise, and ready to unfold. The spark had been struck tonight. The fire would advance when I chose its direction. Calm and collected, I felt the surge of anticipation, knowing the next moves would test every ounce of restraint and strategy I possessed. The warm glow of the Texas suburban evening did little to soften the tension as I stepped into the family gathering. Every smile, every polite nod felt layered with the weight of unspoken histories. June's presence was palpable, her eyes flicking toward me with calculated precision, smirks dancing at the corners of her mouth. I noted the micro behaviors, the way she whispered to cousins, the selective eye contact, the tiny disruptions she orchestrated, misplaced silverware, overlooked invitations, subtle shifts designed to unsettle. Guests remained unaware, chatting and laughing as if the room were ordinary, but I felt the storm gathering, each passing minute adding to the electric anticipation coiling inside me. I moved through the crowd carefully, my mind calculating, weighing diplomacy against the need to expose truths long buried. By mid-evening, the discovery hit me with quiet force. While sorting through past messages and receipts tucked away in the old organizer, patterns emerged, hidden manipulations by June that had quietly influenced family finances and relationships. Every small anomaly I'd noticed before now formed a coherent picture, evidence of deceit and interference I could no longer ignore. My pulse quickened, not from panic, but from recognition, the vindication of suspicions long held. I allowed subtle hints to drift into conversation, casual remarks carefully phrased, signaling my awareness without full disclosure. Micro-expressions among family members shifted, unease and curiosity rising like tidewater against the shore. My emotions balanced between shock and empowerment. The rapid awareness of truth lent my mind sharp clarity. As the evening progressed, I maneuvered strategically, conversing lightly while weaving threads of exposure into my questions and comments. Each interaction was a careful probe, each observation of June's response a measure of her vulnerability. Her hesitations, the micro-expressions of discomfort, confirmed the cracks I suspected. I kept my tone casual, almost breezy, yet every word carried intent, a silent signal of knowledge and precision. In my mind, I mapped the timing, the sequence, the audience for a full revelation that would carry maximum impact while minimizing unnecessary collateral. I reflected on Elijah, on the importance of demonstrating courage, intelligence, and integrity, not just for myself, but for the legacy of truth I aimed to impart. My pacing quickened as the confrontation subtly built, my emotions tempered into calculated assertiveness. Before stepping away to process, I took a brief pause in the study, the quiet contrasting sharply with the tense atmosphere I had left behind. Notes were reviewed, scenarios imagined, the timing of each reveal rehearsed in my mind. I considered potential allies, those who might unknowingly support the exposure, and the sequence that would maximize impact while maintaining control. Clarity settled over me, a calm born from the certainty of purpose. Tonight had shifted everything. The gathering that had seemed ordinary now felt like the edge of a precipice. I would not act rashly, yet every piece was in place, and I knew the moment for decisive action was approaching. With each heartbeat, the anticipation of the next move crystallized, methodical, precise, unavoidable. The dining room glowed under warm, deliberate lighting, casting elongated shadows that seemed to stretch across the family's hidden tensions. I positioned the table just so, heirlooms in view, subtle reminders of legacy and expectation, each object a silent participant in the evening's unfolding drama. I had reviewed the evidence countless times, receipts, messages, little fragments of manipulation that June had left, scattered like breadcrumbs through our lives. My pulse remained steady, though my mind raced, calculating the timing, the audience, and the impact of each reveal. Allies quietly observed, siblings and cousins aware of the stakes, their subtle nods a reassurance that the plan would proceed without unintended interference. Dinner began with laughter and small talk, but I could sense the undercurrent of scrutiny. June's eyes darted toward me repeatedly, a practiced smirk hiding unease. I began dropping subtle inconsistencies into conversation, casually phrased questions that drew attention to her past fabrications and selective misinformation. Whispers swirled around the table as family members sensed the shift. June's composure faltered, her attempts at charm breaking under the weight of scrutiny. I stayed calm, measured, letting the tension swell. Every pause, every deliberate glance allowed the truth to seep in without overt accusation. The room grew thick with anticipation, the subtle manipulations she had relied upon now teetering on exposure. At the precise moment, I introduced the concrete evidence, carefully displayed documents showing financial redirection, screenshots of misleading messages, and traces of prior betrayals meticulously collected over time. The impact was immediate. Gasps echoed, eyes widened, and June's composure snapped, revealing panic and defensiveness. She searched for words, but the factual weight of proof rendered her stammering. And I remained composed, narrating calmly as family members absorbed the revelation, each detail carefully framed to illuminate deception without excess confrontation. Satisfaction coursed through me, not for vengeance, but for the justice of clarity, the exposure of long-concealed truths that had distorted relationships and manipulated trust. The aftermath was a controlled storm. Family members confronted June, voices raised, yet I maintained a steady presence, mediating where intensity threatened to spill into chaos. I observed, measured, aware of each reaction and potential misstep. Reflection washed over me as I considered the ethical balance of public exposure versus private reconciliation. The lines were delicate, but necessary. Notes were taken discreetly, planning for the next steps, whether legal recourse, social accountability, or mending fractured trust. The room settled into an uneasy quiet. The storm temporarily abated, yet a taut anticipation lingered. I knew the final reckoning had not yet arrived. Someone would challenge, someone would attempt a twist. But for tonight, clarity had triumphed, and the first act of truth was decisively performed. The morning sunlight streamed through the blinds, painting the living room in soft golds and quiet clarity. For the first time in weeks, the house felt genuinely calm. I watched as family members moved about, some tentative, others easing into the new rhythm. Faces that had been wary the night before now carried expressions of tentative understanding. Conversations were cautious but kinder, tinged with the relief that comes from seeing hidden truths brought to light. I noted who had aligned themselves with fairness, who remained skeptical, and who simply needed space to absorb everything. Items previously misplaced or withheld found their way back to their rightful places, subtle gestures signaling both moral victory and a small restoration of trust. I felt the weight of tension ease slightly, allowing me to breathe more deeply, to acknowledge my own resilience in the aftermath. Consequences for June unfolded with the same quiet inevitability as the morning light. Family censure was firm yet measured. Social circles whispered their disapproval, and the implications of her actions were finally visible to all. I maintained my composure, refusing to let satisfaction turn to vindictive indulgence. Conversations with supportive cousins and siblings ensured that accountability remained balanced with ethical boundaries, reinforcing that justice did not require cruelty. Observing the shift in the household, I reflected on the lessons I had learned. Patience, intelligence, and strategic thinking were far more effective than impulsive confrontation. Each choice had led to an outcome where fairness prevailed without sacrificing my own dignity. As the day unfolded, I began contemplating the future. Career ambitions, personal life, and family relationships, all colored by the clarity that confrontation had provided. Moments of mentorship and quiet advice flowed naturally, particularly toward younger family members, sharing wisdom gleaned from years of observing, enduring, and responding to manipulation with integrity. Forgiveness, once a difficult concept, felt achievable. Empowerment settled in my chest as an unshakable certainty. Sunlight touched each corner of the home, blinds pulled back as though echoing my own newfound openness to renewal. Spaces rearranged, subtle symbols of a life reorganized and reclaimed, marked the progress from confrontation to restoration. Yet even as satisfaction rooted itself, I remained aware of lingering echoes, small tensions, unresolved threads that life inevitably leaves behind. Vigilance remained a quiet companion, a reminder that while major conflict had been resolved, discernment and wisdom must continue to guide my steps. I paused in the living room, observing the family moving with ease, and allowed myself a reflective smile. The past weeks had tested patience, courage, and strategy, and through it all, I had grown not only as a mother, but as a guardian of truth and justice within our family. The story of this chapter was complete, yet life, as always, promised subtle new challenges. I was ready, empowered, and clear-eyed, fully embracing what came next.